discovery. Luna, 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 Fryan sang, spinning a pyramid in the air. 2 weeks she has been home. Fryan remained delighted. Luna, 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 Luna. He finished his dance with a bit of a flourish, landing on one toe on the center of Luna's palm. He bowed low. Luna smiled, and in spite of herself. Her grandmother was still sick in bed. Still, she had been sick since they returned home. When it was time for bed, she kissed Glurk goodnight and went to the house with Fryan, who wasn't supposed to sleep in Luna's bed, but surely would. Good night, Grandmama, Luna said, leaning over her sleeping grandmother and kissing her papery cheek. Sweet dreams, she added, noticing a catch in her voice. Zan didn't move. She continued to sleep, her open-mouthed sleep. Her eyelids didn't even flutter. And because Zan was in no condition to object, Luna told Fryan that he could sleep at the foot of her bed, just like old times. Oh, joyful joyness, Fryan sighed, clutching his front paw to his heart and nearly fainting dead away. But Fryan, I will kick you out if you snore. You nearly lit my pillow on fire last time. I shall never snore, Fryan promised. Dragons do not snore, I am sure of it. Or maybe just draglings do not snore. You have my word as a simply enormous dragon. We are an old and glorious race, and our word is our bond. You are making all that up, Luna said, tying her hair back in a long black plait and hiding behind the curtain to change into her nightgown. Am not, he said huffily. Then he sighed. Well, I might be. I wish my mother were here sometimes. It would be nice to have another dragon to talk to. His eyes grew wide. Not that you're not enough, Luna, my Luna. And Glurk teaches me ever so many things. And Auntie Zan loves me as much as any mother ever could. Still, he sighed and said no more. Instead, he somersaulted into Luna's nightgown pocket and curled his hot little body into a tight ball. It was, Luna thought, like putting a stone from the hearth in her pocket. Uncomfortably hot, yet comforting all the same. You are a riddle, Fryan, Luna murmured, resting her head on the curve of the dragon, curling her fingers into the heat. You are my favorite riddle. Fryan at least had a memory of his mother, and all Luna had were dreams. And she couldn't vouch for the accuracy. True, Fryan saw his mother die, but at least he knew. And what's more, he could love his new family fully, with no questions. Luna loved her family. She loved them, but she had questions. And it was with a big head of questions that she cuddled under her covers and fell asleep. By the time the crescent moon slid past the windowsill and peeked into the room, Fryan was snoring. By the time the moon shone fully through the window, he had begun to singe Luna's nightgown, and by the time the curve of the moon touched the opposite window frame, Fryan's breath made a bright red mark on the side of Luna's hip, leaving a blister there. She pulled him out of the pocket and set him at the end of the bed. Fryan, she half slurred and half yelled in her half sleep. Get out! And Fryan was gone. Luna looked around. Well, she whispered, did he fly out the window? She couldn't tell. That was fast. She pressed her palm against her injury, trying to imagine a bit of ice melting into the burn, taking the pain away. And after a little bit of pain, the pain did go away, and Luna was asleep. Fryan did not wake up to Luna's shouting. He had the dream again. His mother was trying to tell him something, but she was very far away, and the air was very loud and very smoky, and he couldn't hear her. But he could see her, if he squinted, standing with the other magicians from the castle as the wall crumpled around them. Mama, Fryan called in his dream voice, but his words were garbled by the smoke. His mother allowed an impossibly old man to climb upon her shining back, and they flew into the volcano. The volcano, rageful and belligerent, bellowed and rumbled and spat, trying to hawk them free. Mama! Fryan called again, sobbing himself awake. He was not curled up next to Luna, where he had fallen asleep, nor was he resting his dragon sack suspended over the swamp so he might whisper goodnight to the Glurk over and over and over again. Indeed, Fryan had no idea where he was, and he knew what his body felt strange, like a puffed up lump of bread dough, right before it was punched back down. Even his eyes felt puffy. What is going on? Fryan asked out loud. Where is Glurk? Glurk, Luna, Auntie Zan. No one answered. He was alone in the woods. He must have sleep flown there, he thought, though he had never sleep flown before. For some reason, he was unable to fly now. He flapped his wings, but nothing happened. He beat them so hard that the tree on the either side of him bent away and lost their leaves. Did that always happen? It must, he decided. And the dirt on the ground swirled up like great whirlwinds as he heaved his wings. His wings felt heavy and his body felt heavy, and he could not fly. This always happens when I'm tired, Fryan told himself firmly, even though that wasn't true either. His wings always worked, just like his eyes always worked and his paws always worked. And he always was able to walk or crawl or peel the skin off the fruit and climb trees. All of his various bites were in good operating condition. So why weren't his wings working now? His dream had left an ache in his heart. His mother had been a beautiful dragon, impossibly beautiful. Her eyelids were lined with tiny jewels, each a different color. Her belly was the exact color of a fresh-laid egg. And when Fryan closed his eyes, he felt as though he could touch each buttery, smooth scale on her hide, each razor-sharp spike. He felt as though he could smell the sweet sulfur on her breath. How many years had it been? Not that many, surely. He was still young. He was still just a young dragonling. Whenever he thought about time, his head hurt. Hello, he called. Is anyone home? He shook his head. Of course no one was home. This was no one's home. He was in the middle of a deep, dark forest where he was not allowed, and he would probably die here. And it was all his own stupid fault, even though he was not entirely sure what he had done to make it happen. Sleep flying, apparently, though he thought maybe he had made that term up. When you feel afraid, his mother told him all those years ago, sing your fears away. Dragons make the most beautiful music in the world. Everyone says so. And though Glurk assured him that this was not true, and that dragons instead were masters of self-delusion, Fryan took every opportunity he could to break into song. And it did make him feel better. Here I am, he sang loudly, in the middle of a terrifying wood. Tra-la-la. Bump, bump, bump went his heavy feet. Were his feet always this heavy? They must have been. I am not afraid, he continued, not in the tiniest bit. Tra-la-la. It wasn't true, he was terrified. Where am I? He said out loud. As if to answer his question, a figure appeared out of the gloom. A monster? Fryan thought. Not that monsters were such frightening. Fryan loved Glurk, and Glurk was a monster. Still, this monster was much taller than Glurk. And in shadow, Fryan took a step forward. His great paws sank even deeper into the mud. He tried to flap his wings, but they still wouldn't lift him off the ground. The monster didn't move. Fryan stepped nearer. The trees rustled and moaned, their great branches shifting under the weight of the wind. He squinted. Why? You're not a monster at all. You're a chimney with no house. And it was true. A chimney was standing at the side of the clearing. The house, it seemed, had burned away years ago. Fryan examined the structure. Carved stars decorated the uppermost stone, and soot blackened the hearth. Fryan peered down into the top of the chimney and faced an angry mother hawk sitting on her frightened nestlings. Sorry, he squeaked as the hawk nipped his nose, making it bleed. He turned away from the chimney. What a small hawk, he mused, though it occurred to him that he was away from the land of the giants, and everything was of regular size here. Indeed, he had only to stand on his hind legs and stretch his neck in order to look into the chimney. He looked around. He was standing in a ruined village. among the remains of houses and a central tower and a wall that perhaps was a place of worship. He saw pictures of dragons and volcanoes, even a little girl with hair like starlight. Him once, "She will take care of you when I am gone." He loved Zan from the first moment. She had freckles on her nose and a chipped tooth, and her starlight hair was in long braids with ribbons at the end. But that couldn't be. Zan was an old woman. He was a young dragon, and he couldn't have possibly known her when she was young. Could he have? Zan had taken him into her arms. Her cheek was smudged with dirt. They had both been sneaking sweets from the castle pantry. "But I do not know how," she said, and then she cried. She sobbed like a little girl. But she couldn't have been a little girl, could she? You'll learn," Phryon's mother gently dragony voice said. "I have faith in you." Phryon felt a lump in his throat. 2 giant tears welled into his eyes and went tumbling to the ground, boiling 2 patches of moss clear away. How long has it been? Who could tell? Time was tricky thing, as slippery as mud. And Zan had warned him to be mindful of sorrow. "Sorrow is dangerous," she told him over and over again, though he couldn't remember if she ever told him why. The central tower leaned cautiously to one side. Several foundation stones on the lee side had crumbled away, allowing Phryon to crouch low and peer inside. There was something. 2 somethings, actually. He could see them by a tiny glimmer at the edges. He reached in and pulled them out, held them in his paws. They were tiny. Both fit into the hollow of his palm. "Boots," he said. "Black boots with silver buckles. They were old. They must be. Yet they shone as though they had been just polished." "They look just like the boots from the old castle," he said. "Of course, these can't be the same. They're much too small. The other ones were giants, and they were worn by giants." The magicians long ago had been studying boots just like these. They had placed the boots on the table and were examining them with tools and special glasses and powders and cloths and other tools. Every day they examined and observed and took notes. 7-league boots they were called, and neither Phryon nor Zan were allowed to touch them. "You're too little," the other magicians told Zan when she tried. Phryon shook his head. That can't be right. Zan wasn't little then, was she? It couldn't have been that long ago. Something growled in the wood. Phryon jumped to his feet. "I'm not afraid," he sang, as his knees knocked together and his breath came in short gasps. Soft, padded footsteps drew near. There were tigers in the woods, he knew, or there had been long ago. "I am a very fierce dragon," he called, his voice a tiny squeak. The darkness growled again. "Please don't hurt me," the dragling begged. And then he remembered. Shortly after his mother disappeared into the volcano, Zan had told him this. "I will take care of you, Phryon, for always. You're my family, and I am yours. I am putting a spell on you to keep you safe. You must never wander away, but if you do, and you get scared, just say, 'Annie Zan,' 3 times very quickly, and it will pull you to me as quick as lightning." "How?" Phryon asked. "A magic rope. But I don't see it. Just because you don't see something doesn't mean that it's not there. Some of the most wonderful things in the world are invisible. Trusting in invisible things makes me more powerful and wondrous. You'll see." Phryon had never tried it. The growling came closer. "Annie Zan! Annie Zan! Annie Zan!" Phryon shouted. He closed his eyes, opened them. Nothing happened. His panic crawled into his throat. "Annie Zan! Annie Zan! Annie Zan!" Still nothing. The growl came closer. 2 yellow eyes glowed in the darkness. A large shape hunched in the gloom. Phryon yelped. He tried to fly. His body was too big and his wings were too small. Everything was wrong. Why was everything wrong? He missed his giant, his Zan and his Blurk and his Luna. Luna, he cried as the beast began to lunge. Luna, Luna, Luna! And he felt a pull. Luna, my Luna, Brian screamed. Why are you shouting? Luna asked. She opened her pocket and lifted out Brian, who had curled his tiny body into a tight ball. Brian shivered uncontrollably. He was safe. He almost cried in relief. I was frightened, he said, his teeth caught on the mouthful of nightgown. The girl grunted. You were snoring, and then you gave me a burn. I did? Brian asked, truly shocked. Where? Right here, she said. Wait a minute. She sat up and looked closer. The scorch mark was gone, as was the hole in her nightgown, as was the burn on her hip. It was here, she said slowly. I was in a funny place, and there was a monster, and my body didn't work right, and I couldn't fly. And I found some boots, and then I was here. I think you saved me, he frowned. But I don't know how. Luna shook her head. How could I have? I think we both were having bad dreams. I am not burned, and you have always been safe. So let's go back to sleep. And the girl and her dragon crawled under the covers and were asleep almost instantly. Brian did not dream and did not snore. Again, Brian was still fast asleep in the crook of her arm. Two thin ribbons of smoke undulated from his nostrils, and his lizard lips were curled in a sleepy grin. Never, Luna thought, has there been more content dragon. She slid her arm from underneath the dragon's head and sat up. Brian still didn't move. Psst, she whispered. Sleepyhead, wake up, sleepyhead. Brian still didn't stir. Luna yawned and stretched and gave Brian a little kiss on the tip of his warm little nose. The smoke made Luna sneeze. Brian didn't stir. Luna rolled her eyes. Lazy bones. She slid out of the bed onto the cool floor and hunted for her slippers and her shawl. The day was cool, but would soon be fine. A walk would do Luna good. She reached over to the guide ropes to pull the bed up to the ceiling. Brian wouldn't mind waking up with the bed pulled away, and it felt better to start the day with the bed tied up. That's what her grandmother had taught her. But once the bed was hoisted and secure, Luna noticed something on the floor. A pair of boots. They were black leather and even heavier than they looked like they would be. Luna could barely lift them, and they had a strange smell, one that seemed familiar to Luna. However, though she could not place it. The soles were thick and made of material that she could not immediately identify. Even stranger, they were inscribed with the words on each heel. Do not wear us, said the left heel. Unless you mean it, said the right. What on earth? Luna said out loud. She hoisted one boot up and tried to examine it more closely. But before she could, she had a sudden sharp headache, right in the middle of her forehead. It knocked her to her knees. She pressed the heels of her hand into the skull and pushed inward as though to keep her head from flying apart. Brian still didn't stir. She crouched on the floor for some time until the headache abated. Luna glared at the underside of the bed. Some watch you are, she scoffed. Pulling herself back to her feet, she went over to the small wooden trunk under the window, opened it with her foot. She kept her mementos in there. Toys she used to play with, blankets she used to love, odd-looking rocks, pressed flowers, leather-bound journals, densely scrawled with her thoughts and questions and pictures and sketches. And now boots, large black boots, with strange words and a strange smell that gave her a headache. Luna shut the lid and sighed with relief. When the trunk lid was closed, her head didn't hurt anymore. In fact, she barely remembered the pain. Now to tell Glurk. Brian continued to snore. Luna was thirsty and hungry, and she was worried about her grandmother. She went to see Glurk, and there were chores to be done. The goats needed milking, the eggs needed gathering, and there was something else. She paused on her way to the berry patch. Was she going to ask something? Now, what was it? For the life of her, Luna couldn't remember.